What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Tuesday, June 7th, 2011, and getting into the week. A lot of stuff to talk about today. Phone lines are open, 877-342-6673, 877-342-6673. Brett is in the control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call in with whatever your comments and concerns are about the stories we're going to be talking about today. Now then, I have a special news story. We're starting the show with this news story. This is for Al Gore and all of his carbon Nazis. Okay? This is summer. I live in Hawaii. We're in the tropics. And we got snow up on the summit of Mauna Kea down on the big island. Not unusual in the dead of winter, but we're here in June, in summer. In Hawaii, in the tropics, we got 3 inches of snow on Mauna Kea. Sooner or later, it is going to break through the carbon Nazis that their whole global warming agenda has no more validity, no more reality than Y2K and killer bees. They're still going to come after the carbon taxes, and they're still going to scream, we got to tattoo anybody who doesn't think the way we do, and the rest of it. But we got snow down on Mauna Kea. Not unusual in the winter, I will grant you, but for summer, yeah. This one got headline news in the local newspapers. Now, before we get into the show here, I want to talk a little bit about tomorrow's show. We're going to have a guest. We're going to start getting a lot more guests on the show here. And tomorrow we're going to have Anthony Ibarra from Diginet, and I'm bringing him on the show. His company makes these really cool eyeglasses and pens with video cameras hidden inside them with recorders. I've had a chance to play with a couple of his products, and they're really a lot of fun. But in this day and age where we have the Miami police literally stomping on cell phones to try and keep you from taking videos of them doing bad things, covert concealable camcorders are becoming an essential tool for peace activists and simply those who do not want to live in a country where the police will stomp on your cell phone if you videotape them shooting some guy. So we're going to be talking with Anthony tomorrow, and I hope you'll tune in on that because the stuff is really, it's a lot of fun, too. It's a lot of fun. But there's some very real practical reasons to be investing in this kind of equipment. Now, I want to take a moment here to take to task the present governor of the state of Hawaii, Neil Abercrombie, used to be a representative, and when Linda Lingle was finished being governor, Abercrombie ran and he won in the office, and so far, you know, there's not a whole heck of a lot that he's done. I don't know that there's anything he really can do. But he's trying to do this campaign about the homeless problem here in Hawaii, and we do have a major homeless problem. We've got about 4,000 homeless people just on the island of Oahu alone. It's suspected, it's rumored, it's kind of documented in some cases that a lot of other cities will put their homeless on airplanes with one-way tickets and send them to Hawaii. And I'll be honest, if you got to be homeless someplace, Hawaii isn't too bad. Of course, once you're homeless here, getting anyplace else to be homeless is a real issue. They were talking about buying one-way plane tickets for the homeless here as long as they could document they had somebody on the other end of the trip who was going to take them in. You know, cousins, uncles, aunts, brothers, sisters, whatever, and I don't know where that program went. But Abercrombie's out there talking about his 90-day plan to deal with homelessness and basically force the homeless people off the streets and into these sort of little collection areas. I'm not going to call them concentration camps, but basically they're going to put up these little areas where they're going to have food and get the homeless people to go there so they're not going to be visible to the tourists, either one of them, down in Waikiki. And it does look rather blatantly like a just get them out of the, get them out of eyesight of the rich people as opposed to really dealing with the underlying problems. And now, of course, Abercrombie, as part of his effort to force the homeless to go where he wants them to go, is basically issuing orders saying that Hawaiians, people who live here, should not feed the homeless anymore. Starve them until they go do and what the governor wants to do. And a lot of people are upset about that. I'm one of them. Sometimes some of the laws we have here in Hawaii are just absurd. We have this major population of indigenous, wild, feral cats. They look like your household domestic cats. They're not. They've gone wild. They're the descendants of the ship's mousers from the whaling ships, and they got onto the land, and they do what cats do, and there's a lot of cats all over the place, and they are rather, they can be a little bit of a pest. Now, it's illegal to abuse or harm them, but the state of Hawaii basically says it's also illegal to feed them. So the Hawaii's solution to this whole cat problem is to forcibly starve them to death, and it sounds like they're kind of hedging around doing the same thing for the homeless people. Well, the bottom line here is, not that I have the means to do so, but wherever possible, I'm going to help the homeless. I'm going to feed them wherever I can. Can of Spam here, can of soup here, flat of something, that's near the X date and get it on sale and take it out and hand it out. I'm going to do it wherever I can, whenever I can, and I'm not going to stop for His Honor the Governor. Because if Neil Abercrombie really wants to end Hawaii's homelessness, the necessary first step is to end the joblessness. And the only way he's going to do that is to get rid of the TSA that has destroyed Hawaii's tourism. And Hawaii depends on tourism. That is our primary industry. We don't have as much agriculture anymore. We rely on tourism. We've got a small film industry. That can't support the entire state. We still have a little agriculture. That's okay, not too good. We get about 18% of our current budget from the military. The government spends a lot of money here storing nuclear bombs and all this other stuff around the island and all these ships and everything down there going out and killing people. But you can't keep the entire state functioning with that money either. We need tourism. And until we get rid of the TSA, we're not going to have our tourism. If we get rid of TSA, tourists and tourism jobs will return. But we're going to need a courage to basically shake Michael Chertoff's security industrial complex off of our throats. And we don't have one. And I'm very upset with Neil Abercrombie that, like his predecessor, he wants to try and bandage the symptoms or at least keep it out of sight rather than go after the root cause of why our economy is in the Al-Qaeda. And this is true for anywhere in this country that depends on tourism dollars. We're all suffering right now. Michael Chertoff and his buddies and his investors in Congress, they're getting rich, while we're all being driven into bankruptcy and poverty. And they don't care. They're money junkies. Anything that gets them more money is a blessing and designed and derived from God. It's His will that all the money be piled up around Washington, D.C. and Wall Street. And they absolutely do not care about the damage they do to other industries as long as the money continues to flow toward them. That's the deal here. So, all right, I want to move on here and talk about Anthony Weiner, Anthony Weiner's Weiner, if you will. And now he's making a big show about confessing to lying about the photo, and yes, he was sending these pictures and suggestive pictures of himself, apparently to a lot of women. Apparently to a lot of women here. And then he came out, after he came out with a statement and said, yes, I did all these terrible things, but, I'm not going to resign, and I'm not going to get a divorce. And then he comes out and he says, nothing about this should reflect in any way on my official duties or my oath of office. Now, that is absolutely wrong. Because his actions, his behaviors in carrying on like this with his cell phone camera betrays problems in his decision-making capabilities. It certainly betrays a certain lack of self-discipline. More to the point, such questionable behavior leaves Anthony Weiner susceptible to blackmail because anybody who's hacked into his cell phone, as he was initially claiming was the problem, but anybody who gets into his cell phone or those of the women he is sending the stuff to, or even if one of the women just says, hey, look at what this guy is sending me, and it gets out that way, then he's open to blackmail. Anybody who had copies of those sex messages would be in a position to influence his votes in Congress. And that is why, in point of fact, his behavior with these sex pictures on his phone, sending them to women, can and does reflect most strongly on his official duties and his oath of office. Because if he's leaving himself open to be blackmailed, then he has already violated his oath of office, because if his oath of office is to represent his constituencies, not the person with the little plain brown envelope saying, you vote the way I want or your wife gets these. It's a very reckless kind of behavior, and it shows a complete disregard for the consequences of what he's doing. And I would hope that members of Congress are people who are going to look at the consequences long term of their actions. And if they aren't, if they're only doing what works for today, then they can't be very good congressmen. Now, this article that I took to quote from goes out of its way to remind everybody that Weiner is a pro-Israel, very pro-Israel, hawkish, go out and make war on Israel's enemies, which tells us that he's going to keep his job, because that's just the way it works in the United States of America. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And let me trim that down just a little tiny bit. We're talking about Representative Weiner's Weiner. And we are, there is no truth to the rumor, by the way, that Oscar Mayer is preparing to sue him for trademark infringement. That's a completely bogus rumor. I don't know how these rumors get started, really, I don't. But we're talking about that, and the good news that's coming out of this story is that Representative Weiner is now, by his own admission, a liar. And it's time to go back and look at a lot of the statements that he has made in the past and say, oh, he was probably lying there as well. And two that I can think of, and we commented on them on whatreallyhappened.com earlier this morning, was Representative Weiner made the statement, there is no Israeli occupation of the West Bank, no Israeli military presence there at all. And we know that's a lie. We've seen the pictures. The bulldozers are running again today going over there. And it's just a complete nonsense for him to say that. And then the second statement that Representative Weiner came out with was the Goldstone report on Israel's Operation Cast Lead was not based on the laws of war. Well, in point of fact, Judge Goldstone is an expert on the laws of war and wrote the report for the United Nations basically talking about the violations of international law, that occurred during Operation Cast Lead. So now that Representative Weiner has shot down his own credibility and trustworthiness, and again, that does have bearing on his ability to do his job and his oath of office, we need to go back and look at all the statements that he's made and realize they were also lies. Because in point of fact, Israel is illegally occupying the West Bank, regardless of what Representative Weiner or his Weiner have to say about that situation. So, let's see. Up in Iceland, where they know how to deal with corrupt bankers, the former Prime Minister of Iceland is getting his day in court. Now, he's going in there saying, I'm innocent, it's a plot, the enemies are, I was doing the best I could, honest, and nobody's really paying attention to him. Now, I think Iceland has sort of grown away from the idea of dropping him in a volcano if he's convicted, but they had to do something about it because, the bankers cheated the Icelandic people. They engaged in reckless behavior with the depositors' money. And the government just sat there and said, yeah, go ahead, have fun, let them do it. Same thing that we had here in the United States of America. 1999, Glass-Steagall is repealed. Wall Street goes on a gambling binge. They lose their investors' and depositors' money. That's you. And then the U.S. government comes around and says, that's okay, we'll get the taxpayers, that's you again, to pay for it all. And we went along with this nonsense, and the people of Iceland did not. They threw the bankers in jail, and they fired the government that helped them do it. That's the way to solve the problem. It's called deterrence. Because as long as we go along shoveling what's left of our money to save bankers from their own greed and recklessness, they'll go on being greedy and reckless. There is no educational benefit in bailing out bankers time after time after time after time again. Americans like to think of themselves as brave and courageous, but compared to the Icelanders, you're all a bunch of pussies. Now, over in Egypt, as you may have been aware lately, the new Egyptian government, the temporary government, the revolutionary government, started out really good, opening up the Rafah crossing, refusing to accept Israel's dictates for the Sinai. And then all of a sudden, things started changing. And now we're finding out, back when they started closing the Rafah crossing, and I said, okay, somebody met Egypt's price, and it turned out that's exactly what's going on. Because the International Monetary Fund, which is the Federal Reserve on steroids, has just dropped $3 billion on the brand new government of Egypt for them to basically toe the line and go back to doing what the IMF and the money junkies tell them to do. And the Egyptian people are becoming aware rapidly that Egypt's brand new sovereignty and freedom is being sold off already. That the brand new government of Egypt is just as corrupt as the old government of Egypt, and just as willing to sell their people into perpetual bondage to the bankers as, for example, President Woodrow Wilson in the Congress of 1913. And I think the Egyptian people might have something to say about that. Now, there is a bit of good news on the international front. The Bank of Ireland, which is in serious, serious trouble also because of these mortgage-backed security frauds, this fraud is the biggest financial swindle in history. Wall Street did it, the rest of the world fell for it, and they're all suffering for it. The Bank of Ireland has decided that their bondholders, the owners and investors, are going to have to take the losses, not their depositors, not the taxpayers, not the ordinary working people who had nothing to do with this mess. I don't know if we're going to declare war on Ireland or something over this situation, but that seems to be the direction, that they're going. Ireland is showing a spark of sanity out there. Ordinary people didn't create this mess. Greedy bankers did, and government lackeys, eager for a piece of the action, helped them do it. Over in Greece, the austerity protests are growing. They're going crazy. I was on a talk radio Europe out of Spain earlier today as a guest, and they're saying the riots in Spain are cranking up again. The media is trying to pretend it's not really happening, but it's happening there as well, because everywhere you hear the word austerity, it always translates the same. We're going to take more of your money away from you to give to the bankers, and we've got less money to take care of you. So you're just going to have to give us all your money and make do with holes in the road and collapsing bridges and derailing trains and bad schools and lousy hospitals, because that's the way it's supposed to be, according to the rules the bankers made up to make themselves rich at your expense. This push for a global fascist dictatorship surrounding the IMF may have brought us to the edge of a global revolution. Certainly over in Yemen, everybody's kind of reeling from that. It turns out that Salah is actually in far worse condition than they were saying. Burns over 40% of his body, one lung collapsed, serious lacerations. He may not make it. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about the economic situation. Closer to home here, you've probably been getting as tired as I am about all these euphemisms that the politicians and the media will come out with about the light at the end of the tunnel and, the shoots of renewal and we're turning around and all this other polite language. I mean, we've rebounded and we're on our way back up and all this positive stuff here. And so it probably comes as a shock to everybody who drank the corporate media Kool-Aid that CBS, no less a media icon than CBS itself, is admitting that the chronic unemployment in the United States of America is worse than the Great Depression of the 1930s, which we're going to start calling the second greatest depression, because we're in the Great Depression right here, right now. I know they wanted to change the word and called it a recession and a slowdown and a pullback and a shrunk and a fizbin and anything else that they can use to evade the negative connotations and memories of the last time the bankers did this to us. But even CBS is now having to admit, yeah, it's pretty bad there. And even so, they still are putting this thing in there about how the jobs picture is improving statistically, which is, yeah, the government is continuing to fudge the figures to try and make it look like things are better than they really are. Anytime you hear the word statistically, it means it's not connected to reality. It's just what some mathematician was able to make it look like. You've heard the old saying, there are lies, darned lies, and statistics, and that's exactly the situation here. Last month, in May, half of all the new jobs were created by McDonald's. Does that sound like an improving economy? You can't run a nation just feeding each other food and doing each other's laundry. You've got to make products to sell, and that is something our country just doesn't do anymore. And that's why the unemployment remains high. Nobody is actually doing anything. And there are only so many people you can hire to watch each other. Maybe that's why they've got the TSA and all the security stuff. There isn't really a terrorist threat. It's the only thing they can think of doing to keep people working, to keep the unemployment numbers down. But it's still welfare. You just get a uniform and rubber gloves to go with it. And the opportunity to loot the luggage and fondle naked people, or look at naked people and fondle them. But it's still welfare. They're giving you a check and keeping you fed to keep you happy and complacent. And you're not actually producing anything of any value whatsoever. And as a side effect, you're destroying tourism. Now, another story that we were covering today at whatreallyhappened.com, the United States of America, they're finally starting to admit the scale of the problem. And they're basically admitting the United States of America, meaning the government, the U.S. federal government, has $61 trillion, that's with a T, in unfunded obligations, promises that it has made to people and to corporations that it does not actually have the money to pay for yet. Now, this article in USA Today then launched into a tirade about the social programs like Medicare and Social Security and all the rest of that, acting like this is part of the problem. And it shouldn't be, because Medicare and Social Security have already been paid for. They take money out of your checks to pay for all of this. If they took that money and spent it someplace else, that's the government's problem, not yours. They didn't have your permission to take your Medicare money and your Social Security money and spend it someplace else. Remember back during the Clinton administration, we documented this back then. That economic miracle, the budget surplus that Clinton was crowing about, it's the economy, stupid. He got that budget surplus by looting Social Security. Back in the 1980s, when it was understood that the baby boomer generation, all of the post-World War II kiddies, were growing older, and they were going to start retiring, and the cash flow into Social Security was going to turn negative. So they increased the Social Security taxes, and they started piling up a bunch of money inside the Social Security Trust Fund. And that money was supposed to be there to cover Social Security payments to the baby boomers when they retired. Then Clinton comes along, and he says, wow, that money's just sitting there not doing anything. And so he borrows it, is what he called it, was a loan. Took the money from Social Security, that cash set aside for the baby boomers. He took that, put it over in the general ledger, and spent it like general revenues. And everybody was happy. The Republicans had low taxes. The Democrats had entitlement programs and social programs. And everybody got what they wanted. And this is wonderful. This is wonderful stuff. But then we have a Social Security Trust Fund that is filled with nothing but IOUs. And this all happened during a supposedly really good economy during the Clinton administration. And if the administration, if the executive branch is borrowing money from Social Security during wonderful economic times, you know by default there's never going to be a time they can pay it back. And that's the situation we're in right now. The baby boomers are retiring. There are not enough funds in Social Security to cover all of the obligations. And so the propaganda is, well, it's an unfunded obligation. Yeah, the federal government, specifically the Clinton administration, defunded it. And now they're out there saying, well, we're just going to have to not honor these things because we don't have the money for it. You did have the money for it. You took it and you spent it on other things. You spent it on war. You spent it on Wall Street. You spent it on Israel. You didn't spend it on the people who paid it in to begin with. It's not the problem of the Medicare and Social Security recipients. It's the problem of the government that embezzled that money and spent it someplace it wasn't supposed to go. And that's really what's going on. And more importantly in this tirade by USA Today against Social Security and Medicare, not a single comment about the high cost of the wars, the $27 trillion that Wall Street's fraudulent mortgage-backed securities scam has cost the country so far to date. Nothing about that. That's all holy money. We can't touch that. The money for war, that's sacred. We can't touch that. We can't touch about, all the billions of dollars going to Israel for weapons to kill Palestinians with. That's completely off the table. We even talk about that. Our political careers are over. So Wall Street wrecks the economy, and the government turns around and says, you, the American people, are going to have to pay for it, and you're going to have to live without all of those social services that you already paid for. And that is the point that you've got to keep in your mind. When they start talking about cutting back Social Security and Medicare because they can't afford it, it wasn't their money in the first place. It's your money. You already paid for all these entitlement programs. When they start cutting back on you, they're cheating you. And as long as you sit there and let them do it, they're going to go on doing it because that's the easy solution. They don't dare go up against Wall Street. They don't dare go up against the Pentagon. And they certainly don't dare go up and challenge Israel. They're going to go back to you because you sit there and you take it. And you give them your money and you let them renege on all the promises they've made to you, and you let them treat you disrespectfully, and you say, thank you, sir, may I have another? Like the good little obedient serf that you are. It's like George Carlin said, they're coming for your retirement money. As much as they've got, as much as they've taken, it still isn't enough to satisfy this manufactured, fictional, mythical thing called debt. And they're coming for your retirement money. And it still won't pay it off. The way the Federal Reserve System is set up, you can never, ever, ever pay off the debt. And as long as you believe in compound interest, as long as you believe in divine right and chattel ownership, you will be their slaves. We'll be right back after these commercials.
We will not go down in the night without a fight. You can burn up our mosques and our homes and our schools, but our spirit will never die. We will not go down in Gaza tonight.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're still talking about the economy here. There is an interesting story, rather positive one here, and it involves Bank of America. And it involves an aspect of the story. Remember I was saying before this HBO pseudo-documentary about the financial crisis called Too Big to Fail, where they're trying to make everybody look like they're heroes and just doing the best they can under circumstances nobody was responsible for, which is a complete lie. If you see the documentary that won the Academy Award this year, Inside Job, you will know there was nothing but criminality from top to bottom. So Bank of America was caught foreclosing on homes that not only did not have a mortgage with Bank of America, didn't even have a mortgage at all. So basically, B of A foreclosed on this property, tried to take it. The owners went to court, succeeded in proving Bank of America not only did not have a mortgage on that house, there was no mortgage on the house, they paid cash for it. They'd paid cash for the house. It was owned free and clear. And Bank of America was still trying to foreclose. Because they're desperate to get those homes on their balance sheets to stay solvent. After all, have all the money that's flowing out to buy back all the fraudulent mortgage-backed securities. That's the root cause of all of this stuff. Foreclosure-gate is just the symptom. It's the mortgage security fraud that is the root cause. So anyway, they go to court. They get a judgment. The court says not only does Bank of America, can't foreclose on the property, but Bank of America must pay all the court costs for the resulting legal action because they acted improperly. So 5 months later, Bank of America is still refusing to pay the court costs. So the couple who had the home went to court and basically seized the Bank of America's assets for the unpaid court costs from the first case. And so we have this wonderful video that's going viral out there of Bank of America being foreclosed on. And it's not that Bank of America doesn't have the money to pay their court costs. It is the arrogance displayed by the bankers. First of all, that they felt they could just take anybody's home they needed to take for the cash value without regard to whether there was really a mortgage there or not. And then after they get taken to court and the court says, you got to pay these people's court costs, and the Bank of America says, no, when we're good and ready and not 1 second before. It's that institutional arrogance that has really made people very, very angry with the banks here. I'm old enough to remember when that Bank of America branch got burned during the anti-Vietnam protests. And it was really kind of funny because Bank of America had just come out with the new thing, the picture check. Up until then, checks were just, blank paper with whatever, and they came up with these new scenery checks that had scenes from California on there, and somebody made one of them up with the burning bank building in the background. It was a poster you could find in the head shops and stuff. Yeah, people don't like the bankers. Look at the way they're behaving. Look at the melodrama, the style of American theater that came out of the Great Depression. And you look at the stereotypical villain, the snidely Whiplash type of character with the mustache and the stovepipe hat and the cape and the whip. That didn't just come out of thin air. That characterization is based on the real behavior of the bankers to plunge people into debt, to create an artificial sense of obligation, and to simply grab the real wealth of the country and leave people with these worthless pieces of paper covered with pretty colored ink. They deserve that image and that reputation. And it is not a coincidence that during the French Revolution, long before Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette got to visit Madame Guillotine, the bankers went first. And the French people had good reason for doing just that. So, good on this couple for going after Bank of America. This problem with mortgage fraud, with foreclosures, that homes that were fully paid up were being foreclosed, homes that were completely paid off were being foreclosed. Banks were foreclosing on homes that they'd never had a mortgage on that property. It was just grabbing the houses. It was wealth. It is wealth confiscation to save the banks. They're having to pay out trillions of dollars to buy back all these fraudulent mortgage-backed securities they were selling around the world and to make good on the credit default swaps. And they're sticking you with the bill. And they're going to keep on sticking you and your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren with the bill as long as you sit there and say, yeah, I guess this is the way it's supposed to be in the United States of America. And by the way, it is not. Certainly not the way they started this country. Now, Barack Obama, who was out there speechifying about, yes, I wish we had created more jobs, which, yeah, we sort of figured that would be what you're thinking. Why are you wasting our time telling us about it? And he's probably out there speechifying right now because he's looking at a very, very dim prospect for victory in 2012. And he's lost his Osama bin Laden bounce. Remember back on the 1st of May, we got Osama bin Laden and we've got pictures to prove it. No, those were Photoshop. Well, we've got these other pictures to prove it. No, those were Photoshop. And we've got this other picture. No, that was a fake too. And finally they said, we're not going to release photos of the dead bin Laden. That would only upset the Arab Muslims, like bombing their countries for the last decade didn't already do that. And so President Obama basically bet their biggest phony terror threat to prop up his approval ratings. And he got a little bump for a little while, but it's gone already. And Americans are focused back on the things that really affect their lives. The economy and the mismanagement of the budget by the federal government and the failure of the federal government to hold Wall Street to account for wrecking the economy. Those are going to be the issues going to the election. So I don't know, I'm guessing that President Obama will be out next week saying, all right, we've identified Jack the Ripper. I have a picture of Bigfoot. Loch Ness Monster, a space alien. How about a space alien? If I get one of those, will you vote for me? I can prove Elvis is really dead. They're desperate to find anything that they can run on other than the things that are really important to America or should be important. The economy, the wars, and the continued groveling by our government before Israel. Now, I've mentioned before this idea that TSA may have been whipped into a feeding frenzy on all of us so that politicians, and in particular President Obama, can use them as a sacrificial lamb to try and buy themselves electoral victory next year. And one of the reasons I'm thinking that may still be going on here, there's this story about a cruise ship basically going around the United States of America with these elderly British people, retirees, vacation of a lifetime, and they're basically just visiting all these cities from Alaska down to the Caribbean. And they get to Los Angeles. And apparently one of them made a remark about the abusive treatment they're getting at the hands of TSA, and wondering just why it was necessary when they'd already endured the same treatment over and over and over again at every American port they put into. Well, apparently TSA is not in the mood to have those uppity passengers talk back, and so they took these elderly British passengers and they put them through a 7-hour security check. No available water, not allowed to go to the restroom. Some of the people were passing out from the heat in the room where they were being kept. And the passengers all said, they're taking revenge on us because we refuse to be cowed. We refuse to grovel before them. We refuse to kneel and debase ourselves before the mighty TSA, and this was their revenge. And they're right. The TSA are exactly that arrogant. You take any moron and give them a badge, and you will see the most arrogant, dictatorial, tyrannical, instant jerk imaginable. All it takes to turn a total loser into a total tyrant is just a little bit of authority. A plastic badge and rubber in Hawaii. And TSA has all but destroyed our tourism economy. Nobody can relax on the islands because you're treated like a POW everywhere you go. In fact, we're hearing comments from people saying that they feel like they're not going to Los Angeles or Hollywood or Miami. They feel like they're being taken to Guantanamo because of the way TSA treats them. So my advice to you, if you are listening to this broadcast from outside the United States of America, stay away. Stay away from the United States of America. I know it's in summer and travel and tourism. Everybody wants to visit stuff. There's nothing here in the United States of America that is worth the hassle that you're going to get having to go through the TSA gates, see your wives and daughters fondled and groped by these perverts. They just arrested a TSA worker in Orange County. Apparently he's a bondage freak. Ooh, isn't that somebody you want to have fondling your wife? He was trying to keep a 15-year-old girl as a sex slave. You know, this is the kind of people they're hiring for TSA. And, of course, the looting of your luggage. They busted that guy at Newark, stole $400,000 worth of personal electronics from the luggage of travelers. And they didn't want to say anything because they knew if they spoke up about, oh, the TSA is bad, that they would get treated the way this ship full of passengers just did. Look at it this way. When Germany was under control of Hitler and the Gestapo, would that have been a fun place to vacation at when they were running the place? I rest my case. So find some other vacation destination. There are lots of places in the world you can go to. You know, Australia is wonderful. I've been down there. A lot of cool stuff. Tahiti, and now that they've stopped those French nuclear tests. Or Fiji. Fiji's wonderful. That place is just blooming up in the outer islands. There's all kinds of wonderful places to go where you can go and relax and have a good time without being treated like you are the scum of the earth, simply for wanting to have a little bit of privacy and not have to show your private parts to some total stranger with purple rubber gloves. Don't come here to the United States of America. I can say that. I'm not afraid of harming Hawaii's tourism because it's already destroyed anyway. But I'm telling you, if you want to have a good time on your vacation, go anywhere but the United States. We're going to take a break for the news. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, to hour number 2 here. And before we get off onto this thing, I want to do a small tip of the hat to Brett and Todd, who seem to be getting our little technical issues under control, and we're having a much smoother and much more enjoyable, fun time on our program today. So well done, guys. Download a cookie. And thank you for all the efforts on behalf of the quality of our show. Now, as you heard on the news broadcast, the TSA understands that Americans are upset at being groped and fondled and strip-searched and made to stand naked before the government for the privilege of being allowed to travel anywhere. And they're working on these high-tech tunnels, where you will be sent down different tunnels based on your security classification. And that if you go through all of this, you won't be groped and touched and fondled anymore, which is an improvement, but I have a couple of concerns. First of all, TSA is saying they're not going to get them in the United States for 5 years. They were certainly able to get all these other machines in service very, very quickly at our expense. Okay, so 5 years, I don't know, I'm having a problem with that one. I'm not sure these are going to work. This might just be propaganda to say, yeah, we know you don't like having your wives and daughters molested by these total strangers, but put up with it now because it's only going to last a little while. It's not like it's permanent. That might be part of it. The other issue is, how do they know who's got a security problem and who doesn't? Facial recognition, that has never worked. Are they going to put chips in us so they say, yes, you're trusted and you're not? They're going to put tattoos on us? Yes, you're allowed to go through the green tunnel. The problem I have, though, most of all, is that these tunnels are still scanning and X-raying and terahertzing us. And the World Health Organization is finally coming to admit that low-power radio waves are, in fact, damaging to DNA. The official claim up until now has been that the actual energy level of the radio waves was not enough to break chemical bonds within the molecules. But there's a new phenomenon just now discovered called molecular resonance. Now, resonance can allow low levels of energy to destroy very strong structures, and the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, a.k.a. Galloping Gertie, is a prime example of that. But Johns Hopkins University and MIT have both published peer-reviewed studies showing that these radio waves used in terahertz scanners and presumably cell phones can start the molecules of DNA shaking. And after they shake long enough, they'll start breaking apart, even though the individual energy on an individual pair of atoms would not tear it apart. So this is all brand new. They didn't know before, and that's always going to be the government's excuse. We didn't know. We're living through a replay of the shoe store fluoroscopes. And that was the excuse back then. Yeah, we're sorry all those operators died of cancer, but we didn't know. We're blameless. We're exonerated. We didn't know any better. We thought we were trying our best. We meant well. That's always going to be, we meant well. Yeah, we gave cancer to millions of Americans, but we meant well. You know, I mean, yeah, 15 million Americans come down with skin cancer because of TSA here, but that's a small price to pay to make sure that Osama bin Laden doesn't steal another airplane. Do you know that TSA still has never actually caught a single real terrorist in all of this nonsense? It's just all about the money. They've sold us one set of machines. Now they're getting ready to sell us another set of machines. These machines will be better. We won't grope you if you'll just go along with this a little bit more. Personally, I think if we stop making war on other people's countries, the terrorists will go home, if there are any real ones out there. And I don't think there are. I think they're all phonies. They're all fakes like Adam Perlman. They're there to scare you into throwing your money and your children onto, wars for other people's benefit. Alrighty, let's see, moving right along here. Phone lines are open, 877-342-6673. Brett's asleep in the control room. If you call in, you'll wake him up and he'll spill his coffee all over his blue jeans there. Let's see, we talked about, another story here. Apparently up in Manchester, New Hampshire, which is where I'm from originally. I was born in Boston, grew up in New Hampshire. In Manchester, New Hampshire, there's been another incident where the police department are confiscating video cameras from peaceful demonstrators in order to prevent from going viral on YouTube what the police are doing. This is why we're going to have Anthony Ibarra on the show tomorrow talking about the Diginet glasses and pens. And another thing that a lot of these protesters are doing, instead of simply taking a video and risk having the police destroy the cell phone and the video itself, they're starting to use these online streaming video recorders. There's one that's called Quix. I think Ustream allows you to literally shoot video on your cell phone and have it immediately upload to their servers remotely. And if you're using a system like that to record the police behaving in a very un-American fashion, then even if they smash your cell phone, they can't keep the video out of the eyes of the public. And we need to emphasize that this technology is out there, simply so that the police understand that technology is out there, and they understand they can't behave like jackbooted thugs anymore and expect to get away with it just because the TV networks won't report it. We're becoming our own media, the vox populi, if you will. We are our own best media reporting on what's going on here in the United States and around the world. All right, talking a little bit about nuclear power here. We are seeing a very strong growing of anti-nuclear sentiment now in France. Ever since Fukushima melted down, there have been country after country saying, we can't do this anymore. It's too dangerous. 3 strikes and you're out. And now apparently 75% of the French population support a shutdown of all of France's nuclear power plants. Now, just before we went to airtime today, this is an important story, so please pay attention. Just before we went to airtime today, we got a news story that came in where the government of Japan and TEPCO are preparing a formal report for the United Nations International Atomic Energy Agency on what happened at Fukushima. The report is that Japan is now admitting that not only did reactors 1, 2, and 3 suffer meltdowns in the first hours after the quake, they suffered outright burn-throughs. Remember China syndrome? Fuel goes critical, melts down, melts through the pressure vessel, melts through containment, down to the floor of the power station, and down into the ground. They're now admitting that's what happened with all 3 of these reactors. What is interesting about this is that 3 weeks after the accident happened, it was reported that reactor 2 had had a burn-through, where fuel from the reactor core had burned through the pressure vessel, burned through containment, and was burning down through the foundations of the building into the ground. China syndrome. And then that report was quickly denied. Oh, no, that was a mistake. And now that the IAEA is involved in actually inspecting things and looking at the reports for themselves, Japan is saying, yeah, not 3 meltdowns, 3 burn-throughs, melt-throughs. This is as bad as it gets. This is the ultimate nightmare scenario of fission-based nuclear power, where the safety decisions are all made by money junkies. The radiation from reactor 1 continues to increase, so wherever all that fuel slag has collected together and pooled, it is still undergoing fission. They're never going to be rid of this thing. They're never, ever going to be rid of this thing. Now, about a month ago, I wrote a story, and I will admit it's a little dramatic and a little bit over the top, but I put it out there because I wanted to make a point about this ongoing, continuing desire to bomb Iran's power station. And now that Japan has admitted that 3 of the reactors at Fukushima suffered complete, total, catastrophic meltdown and burn-throughs, China syndromes times 3. I revived the story and I wanted to put it out there. And basically, if you look at the people in Japan, if you look at the people on the west coast of the United States, or even here in Hawaii, we know the radiation is in the air. We have a radiation meter. We have seen it day after day get a little bit higher and a little bit higher and a little bit higher, and we're still in the safety range, but that's not going to last forever. And we know that very dangerous levels of radiation and contamination have been hitting the west coast of the United States and Canada. And so I wrote this story called Monsters Live Among Us, and it's just saying, imagine that fear of not knowing whether the air that you're breathing is carrying that invisible particle of plutonium that will mean your death, or the hideous deformation of your unborn children. And having to live with that fear and doubt every single breath of every single day, day after day, month after month, year after year. And it's one thing to have to go through that fear because of accident and stupidity, but understand that when we talk about bombing Iran's power station, we're talking about putting the people of Iran through that fear deliberately. And that is quite monstrous. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I want to clarify something. I'm getting some email about, being a Luddite and a caveman and all the rest of that stuff. And no, I don't sell car insurance or anything like that. I'm actually very pro-science. I grew up in a scientific environment. I'm ex-NASA. When I was a kid, I built telescopes. I was the fat kid with the slide rule on his belt. The football players in high school would beat up to do his homework. That was me. And I love science. And I think science in and of itself is pretty good. And I really do like. I'm sorry, I was distracted. I was talking with the guy in the control room. I'm very pro-science. I think it's very useful. I think scientific method is something everybody should learn and apply for themselves. I don't think we should go around allowing scientists to be the new priesthood, because con artists can wear white lab coats as quickly as they can wear the cloth of the church. And individual scientists are still human beings who are subject to bribery and desire for career advancement. But scientific method, I think, is something we should all be learning. And I don't know why our schools aren't teaching it. Actually, I do. The schools do not want to teach you how to think and perceive and analyze for yourself. You're being taught to be an empty vessel, to simply receive wisdom from figures in authority positions, whether it's on TV or at the podium at a political party. The last thing the government wants are people who actually can think and analyze. But I think science and engineering very good, although science very often is used for very evil purposes. But I think the hallmark of America in the latter part of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century is an incredible degree of recklessness with what are some of the most dangerous technologies out there. And I'm not talking just about nuclear reactors, but this business of genetically modified crops, because these technologies are being put into commercialization without really understanding how these things work all the way through. My biggest argument about the new technologies being brought online is they're being put out to market to generate profit before they're thought all the way through. And I'll give you a really good example. This one is relatively benign. We get this one from Al Gore and the Carbon Nazis, was this whole ethanol business. You know, we can be carbon neutral by growing our fuel, putting it in the car and burning it in the car, and then it goes back to the atmosphere, and it's all carbon neutral. And it sounded really good. And it made a really good soundbite, and the people who were involved in this business made a lot of money. But they didn't think it all the way through, because as it turns out, the ethanol loop is not carbon neutral because they weren't including the carbon footprint of the processing that takes all of this grown plant matter and turns it into ethanol. The second thing nobody was thinking about is if you have the government mandate so many acres of farmland stop producing food for people and start producing ethanol for cars, that was going to negatively impact food prices. And that certainly did happen. Even before all the additional farmlands lost to flooding and toxic materials, industrial waste pouring onto them, we were already seeing food prices and even food shortages resulting from the diversion of farmland to ethanol. Then, of course, ethanol is nowhere near as energetic as gasoline, so you had to buy and burn more of it to get the same amount of work that you would with the conventional existing petroleum-based technology. And that means it was actually much more expensive for people to be using the ethanol. And finally, as it turned out, for older cars that were not built to use the ethanol was destroying the fuel systems, because the components, the soft components in the fuel system, the pump diaphragms, the tubings, and all the rest of that were not designed to work with very small ethanol molecules. They were designed to work with these long-chain hydrocarbons that you find in gasoline. And so cars were being damaged, and Germany's gone so far as to completely drop this whole ethanol idea because it was wrecking the cars. And when you add in all of the additional manufacture for new parts for the cars and towing and all the rest of it, you wind up with the fact that the carbon footprint from ethanol was actually greater than just if they'd left it alone and stayed with the gasoline. And that's what I mean by not thinking things all the way through. They see something that makes a good sales pitch, they go out, they pitch it, and they say, yeah, let's make money, and we go with it, and then it winds up actually being far more destructive than just leaving things alone. We continue to hear stories about all these vaccines that are put out there for diseases most of us will never ever be exposed to anyway, and then the vaccines are causing problems. In 1976, the swine flu vaccine killed more people than the swine flu itself did. But it's all about the money, because nothing makes money better for those doctors than selling medicine to people who aren't even sick to begin with. And it goes on and on and on and on. So now we have this situation with these genetically modified crops, and the scientists are going in there and they're modifying the gene to get a certain behavior. And what they don't understand is that when you modify a gene in a living organism, it's going to have other effects, unexpected effects, in other parts of the life form. You're not just changing one thing. It's not like a car where you put a larger light bulb in the headlight and you get a brighter light. When you change a gene in the basic fundamental chemistry of a life form, you're going to see effects from that change all over the life form, many of which you're not looking for. You're not able to predict. Anyway, there's this story coming out of Argentina where an embryologist, Andre Carrasco, gave an interview with the Buenos Aires newspaper in which he presented his laboratory evidence that the chemical glyphosate, which is the weed-killing agent in Roundup, weed killer, and also in, killing the other guy's cocaine plants in the war on drugs, was causing defects in fetuses, unborn children. And the levels required to cause birth defects were far lower than peasants and farmers were already being exposed to. And he called for a ban on glyphosate. And apparently, he got assaulted and beaten up for saying this thing. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So we're finishing up on this topic about genetic engineering and the very reckless way in which these technologies are implemented. And again, given that they're playing with the fundamental chemistry of life itself, and they're not being very careful about it, we could see really major disasters. I mean, Fukushima is bad, but it's pouring into the Pacific Ocean, and it's sort of kind of localized. But if you make a mistake with a gene and it breaks into the wild, there's virtually no way to get it back. And all possible care is justified in using these technologies. And it looks like some pretty bad mistakes are being made. All right, I want to move on here. James Carville, who you probably remember from the Clinton years, he was always out there screaming, "It's a war! There's a war! We got to get..." And just, haranguing, going out and getting those gosh darn Republicans and basically cranking up on that. And he's mellowed a little bit with age. And he's basically out there saying that 2012 is going to be very rough for Obama, which is kind of a study in foregone conclusions. But then he goes on and basically says that civil unrest in the United States of America is imminently possible. Now, this is not a surprise for any of us who are here watching the real world, but it is becoming very telling that the corporate media and propaganda are finally starting to face up to what's really happening in this country. Like I said earlier in the show, CBS is admitting the chronic unemployment in the United States of America is now the worst it's ever been, worse than the Great Depression or the last Great Depression, and this is the new Great Depression. This is the Great Depression we're in right now. CBS is now admitting it. And now Carville is out there saying that, yes, civil unrest is imminently possible. We're at the breaking point. And the part that is really sad to consider for those who still love what this country was supposed to be, even if it is not that anymore, is that the country could still be saved. If the money junkies could just say, okay, the debt was a made-up thing anyway, we're simply going to forgive all debts, reset to zero, and start all over again. They used to do that in ancient Rome. That's what Jubilee was all about. Every so many years, when the system got too out of balance because of interest on loans, they'd forgive all the debts for everybody and say, okay, status quo ante, and let's start all over again. Because debts are not real. It is merely a token of obligation and empowerment by the bankers over everybody else. But the bankers cannot admit that they've been wrong to do what they did. And so they will not change their minds, and they will not forgive the debts, and as a result, the country's going to get thrown off the edge of a cliff. Because better the nation go up in flames than to lose 1 penny of profit, or so goes the wisdom of Wall Street. Now, behind it all, we're seeing yet again a renewed effort to sell America on the need to attack Iran. They're back to pushing Iran's nuclear weapons. And they've got a new tack. There was the story that came out supposedly from the RAND Corporation, which are heavy pro-war government contractors, where they're saying, okay, well, maybe Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon right now, But they could have one in just 2 months, and therefore we should go bomb them. Which is nonsense. What they're saying is we should bomb anybody who might build a nuclear weapon sometime in the future. And that's absurd, because everybody is able to build a nuclear weapon. Want to know how to build an atomic bomb, a uranium bomb? Plutonium bomb is complicated. Uranium bomb is simple. 2 chunks of uranium, slap them together, it goes bang. There, you're all now nuclear weapons designers and deserving of being bombed, according to the Rand Corporation. And it's just absurd. They're trying to get a new war going, because the war hawks are thinking if we can get another world war going, they'll forget all about the bad stuff. They'll salute the flag and they'll throw their babies onto the enemy's bayonets for us. Which, no, we won't. But they're still trying to push that whole situation. Now, Seymour Hersh, who writes a lot of really good observations on this, he's saying even though the government knows they lied about Iraq's nuclear threat, and even though the United States government knows that the majority of Americans know that the U.S. government lied about Iraq's nuclear threat, that they're going to go ahead and try and do the same thing about Iran, because they really don't have any other choice. If they don't get a truly global world war going, public support for the government is just going to continue to evaporate. And so they're willing to basically set fire to the rest of the world because they can't think of anything else to do, and they can't get the money junkies to back off and say, all right, let's have the common people get their money back, and we'll start the system all over again. So, America solves their monetary problems with war. They turn the blood of our children into gold in their pockets, or gold in my sacks. Speaking of which, as I mentioned earlier in the show, why are we bombing Libya into rubble? Well, because they dared to have a government-issued currency based on value, the gold dinar, horror of horrors. That cannot be allowed to be in a world dominated by private central banks and debt-based currency. And apparently Libya foolishly invested $1.3 billion of their sovereign wealth fund, on which their value-based currency was to be based, with Goldman Sachs. And Goldman Sachs lost 98% of that money through the mortgage-backed security fraud. And Libya was getting ready to press charges. And so Lloyd Blankfein says, we're going to do God's work, and we're going to order the White House to bomb Libya so they can't take us to court. And the problem is solved. So your tax money is being spent to bomb Libya to protect Goldman Sachs from having lost all of Libya's money. Does that sound like a just cause for war? And for all that money that you've paid into the United States government, for which you're not getting back any benefits, they're using that money to murder people around the world. You share the guilt. The blood is on your hands, or at least on your checkbooks. Meanwhile, over in Israel, interesting development. Israel's always talking about the demographic bomb and how they were justified in going out and having snipers shoot Palestinian children because they couldn't grow up and breed more children, because the birth rate of the Palestinians was greater than that of the Israelis, and they didn't want to wind up like another South Africa where they're actually the minority and sooner or later the majority will take over and have majority rule. But apparently Israelis living in Israel, remember they were always trying to escape to Israel from Europe, now they're getting passports. They're leaving. The government of Israel has gone so overboard in terms of its abuse of the West Bank and Palestine, and has just made Israel a pariah among the moral people of the world. And the people living in Israel are saying, I don't need to have this. I don't need to be associated with this kind of behavior. And they're leaving. They're going back to Europe. The Jews living in Iran refused to move to Israel no matter how much money Israel offered them. And we understand that as Hitler was rising to power, the smart Germans left. They left Germany. They got out before things really got bad. That seems to be what's happening in Israel. They're getting out while the getting is good. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our show in just a minute. 877-342-6673. And Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of the show today, and things have been going very, very smoothly. I'm very happy with the tech support we're getting from Brett and Todd and Rents Radio in general. So things are kind of smoothing out. We can focus on the important work, the mission of getting the truth out to the American people so they can make good choices, especially as we head into a 2012 election season or protests or whatever. However, we're going to save the country from the money junkies. Now, down in Arkansas, kind of an interesting story kicking up there. The Arkansas Transit Organization refused an ad for a humanist content. Basically, the ad was, "Are you good without God?" Millions are, and it is simply pointing out the fact that there are large numbers of people who are not religious. I'm one of them. And the Arkansas Transit Organization basically said, we're not going to sell you the ad here. Now, their interpretation of the law on the First Amendment is that they have to run ads for churches, and any churches they can't show any partiality. But when you have an ad that says there is no God, that they think they have the right to block that. So they're being sued. I think they're going to lose because freedom of speech means freedom of speech that people may not agree with. And if you are out there and you are saying it's okay for religious institutions to come advertise on my bus, then you have to allow non-religious institutions to do so as well, because freedom of religion also means freedom from religion. And the reality is, especially in the wake of all of these scandals about pedophile priests, and certainly looking at the way the world is operating around us right now and what dark times that we live in, the corruption of the rich and powerful, and certainly these endless natural disasters like wildfires, floods, tornadoes going on here, people are beginning to say, well, I'm not sure there's a God anymore, and if he's up there, then he's a mean fink and not worthy of worshiping and praying to. Certainly any deity that's going to have on his staff people who like to have sex with children is not somebody that I could respect or bow down to or should bow down to. So that's an interesting little free speech and freedom of religion and freedom from religion lawsuit that we will see developing over the next couple of weeks. Now, I want to talk about computers and computer hacking. There's this group out there that calls itself Anonymous, and they're out there causing all kinds of damage and destruction, and I think they're actually a government propaganda outfit that is intending to create a public climate that will support Barack Obama's new cybersecurity initiative, which he's trying to hype up as something that he can campaign on in 2012, because he certainly can't run on the economy and the wars and his handling of the Gulf oil disaster, or indeed his handling of the Fukushima disaster. So he's got to create a crisis that he can campaign on. And so this anonymous hacker group showed up, and they're starting to cause a lot of trouble. And now it turns out this anonymous hackers group that was supposed to be going after the global banking cartel, it turns out they're attacking Iran's computer servers. So obviously this anonymous hacker group is working for either the United States or the Israeli government and going after Iran as a prelude to going in and causing some kind of mischief and damage. What they could do is, if they're breaking into Iran's computer servers, they could then turn around and use those servers to stage a major computer internet shutdown that would then be blamed on Iran. And remember, we had last week this declaration by the United States military that they will respond to a cyber attack as if it were a real act of war. In other words, if another one of those Viagra ads shows up in the White House computer system, they will go bomb the country that they think is originating the cyber warfare. So a very good reason for Anonymous to be going after Iran's computer servers is to then use those servers to basically cause trouble, to be blamed on Iran. Now, the reason I bring this up is because there's an interesting statistic that just came out here where they're basically saying that 1 out of every 4 United States hackers, computer hackers, is working for the FBI. And what they're saying is the FBI, every time they actually catch a hacker, They won't arrest them. They won't throw them in jail. They'll just say, you work for us now. You know, you will inform on your fellow hackers. Or we've got a little job for you. We want you to go and wreck the servers of this pro-peace, pro-truth website that is really being an annoyance, and we can't find an official reason to shut it down, so go there and make mischief and email bomb them and jam them up. I mean, we saw this kind of behavior back in the 1960s during the height of COINTELPRO, where the FBI had undercover informants on every college campus in America, and they still do, by the way. If you're listening to the show and you go to college, that smelly kid that always wants to join all the radical and freedom groups, that's probably your FBI informant right there. So back during the 1960s, the FBI's undercover informants on college campuses would infiltrate the peace groups and they'd cause trouble. They'd do things that would allow the media to come in and demonize the anti-Vietnam war protest. Biggest stunt they pulled was staging this riot at Disneyland in Anaheim, apparently with Disney management's agreement, to create a media event to make the peace movement look like a bunch of thugs and jerks and allow the war to perpetuate for another 2 years to 60,000 dead Americans. So the FBI does this stuff. They have a long history of doing this kind of stuff, and now apparently 1 out of every 4 American computer criminals is actually working for the FBI. So when we start seeing all this stuff about this threat from cyber criminals to justify censorship and government control, it's probably a government operation. I think I already told you the story about the Exxon Amendment and the porn plague that was poured all over the Internet from mil and gov domains. And as soon as Exxon got his amendment voted on, it turned off like a switch had been thrown. That's how government operates. They create a crisis, then they sell you the solution to it in exchange for higher taxes and reduced freedoms. They're trying to do that with this whole carbon dioxide, carbonazi global warming thing. The world is warming and you are to blame, and we've got a solution, but it will cost you money. And even though we have snow down on the top of Mauna Kea, here in summer, in Hawaii, in the tropics, they're still going to come back and say, oh, trust us, we wouldn't lie to you. It's all the fault of your SUV. All right, we're coming to the, we got a caller. Almost missed it. Ran out of time. Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I just wanted to call you because I didn't hear anybody else call in. But, you know, Michael,
you're the only one. You're the first caller. You've won an all-expense-paid 2-week cruise on a steam torpedo.
Hey, brother. But anyways, keep up on the economic thing. You know, Michael, I want to say real quick, I heard from my landlord, he had a couple guys that he used to work with at a place that closed down that are living off their portable pensions now. And I saw a while back that at least 23 to 24% of Americans are living off their portable pensions. So why doesn't the news talk about that? Another thing, why don't they talk about how many people across this nation are on food stamps? We got the housing in record history a mess. And it's just amazing, like you said, you got these guys that are living in, I don't know, very little God glasses or something, that sit there and keep lying to the American people, but yet we got 5 major indicators of where the United States is so far in debt.
Well, the corporate media is not reporting that to the American people because the corporate media and the government are absolutely terrified that what happened in Iceland and what happened in Egypt is going to happen here, and it is. It's just a matter of when. And so, you know, they're already talking about putting lithium in the water to keep us doped up. You know, like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World will wander around going, Soma, Soma. And the situation is the corporate media is propagandizing us to say it's going to be okay. Don't do anything. Don't get angry. You're only going to be groped at the airport for another 5 years. Then we'll have a better system. The jobs are coming back, even though it's all low-paying stuff at McDonald's. You know, and they're just trying. They are unable to fix the economy. They're unable to manage the disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. They're unable to deal with any of the problems that are going on. They're managing you. That's the job of the corporate media, is to manage you on behalf of the government, to keep you in your corral, to keep you dumbed down and tranquilized and placid because they're afraid of a stampede. Because they understand that if a riot breaks out at the airport, at the TSA gates, if a riot breaks out at the DMV TV, if it breaks out at the library, if it starts anywhere and gets going, there will be no stopping it, because a rage, years in the building, is years in the cooling. And America, we're furious. We're angry at what these money junkies have done to what used to be the greatest nation on earth.
Yeah, Michael, I'll finish up with this. So, I was seeing a thing on YouTube. I watch that once in a while. I watch where I tread. But you know what's growing, Michael? And I'd like to see these news cameras take their cameras down to the guys living under bridges and have the people of shanty towns and tent cities that are growing across this nation. That would be telling the truth to a lot of Americans if they got to see the footage of that. So thanks for taking my call, brother, and keep it up, you fighter.
You're absolutely right. And as a matter of fact, it's for that very reason that the corporate media is never going to take their cameras down to these shanty towns. It has been done a few times, and people got very, very upset. And so the media says, we don't need to show that anymore. We're going to, and if you look at TV right now, we're seeing almost the same entertainment we saw during the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, there were like the dance marathons, which was the reality show of their day. Keep them dancing until they can't dance anymore and they collapse on the ground in pain. And we're seeing this man versus food. I see the commercials for that. I cannot even begin to watch that show. In a nation with this much hunger and starvation, they're making a show about a guy who can eat more than anybody else? That's sick. That's absolutely sick. But it's like the Busby Berkeley musicals about We're in the Money, and it's all distraction to keep people from thinking about just how bad things are. Or at the very least, to convince you that if you are struggling and you've lost your job and your home and your business, that it was somehow all your fault, and not to blame the bankers and the government for doing it. I still remember, I still have it saved on the hard drive, this call we got from a woman named Pamela years ago, and it was so heartbreaking because she bought the Kool-Aid that everything that was done to her was her fault. That's it for our show. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Rents Radio Network. Until then, stay safe and aloha, America.